Palace account books, personnel registers, court chronicles, and legal petitions preserved from the Ottoman Imperial Court offer an unusually detailed administrative window into the inner functioning of the imperial harem. Contrary to popular portrayals shaped by later imagination, these records describe a highly regulated institution embedded within the broader bureaucratic machinery of the empire. Surviving documents suggest that the imperial harem functioned less as a realm of unchecked indulgence and more as a structured household governed by hierarchy, discipline, and political significance. The Ottoman Imperial Harem, primarily located within the Topkapi Palace after the 16th century, was administratively integrated into the palace's enderun system and subject to fiscal oversight similar to other imperial departments. Treasury registers indicate that concubines were listed alongside other palace personnel, receiving stipends, clothing allocations, and ration distributions recorded with meticulous precision. These entries reveal that concubines were not a homogeneous group, but were classified according to rank, training status, and proximity to the ruling household. Most concubines entered the palace through systems of enslavement tied to imperial expansion, diplomatic exchange, and slave markets operating across the Black Sea and Caucasus regions. Contemporary accounts describe Circassian, Georgian, and occasionally Balkan origins among the enslaved women brought into palace service. Legal codes of the period reveal that once incorporated into the imperial household, these women were removed from commercial circulation and became members of the Sultan's protected domestic establishment, altering their legal and social status within Ottoman norms of slavery. Palace training registers indicate that new arrivals underwent extended periods of instruction before any advancement was possible. Surviving documents suggest that education included language acquisition, court etiquette, religious instruction, music, embroidery, and household administration. Chroniclers noted that discipline was enforced through senior female officials, particularly the Khalfa and USTA ranks, who supervised both moral conduct and skill development. This system created an internal hierarchy where authority flowed primarily through experienced women rather than male officials, although ultimate oversight remained connected to the Sultan and the chief eunuch. Financial account books demonstrate that concubines received regular stipends scaled according to rank. Payment lists reveal incremental increases corresponding to promotion, with favored concubines receiving enhanced textile allowances and access to private servants. These economic records complicate simplified assumptions about powerlessness, indicating that some women accumulated personal wealth, maintained private property within legal limits, and engaged in charitable endowments after leaving palace service. Surviving Vakfi documents suggest that former concubines occasionally financed fountains, schools, and religious structures, embedding themselves within urban philanthropic networks. The presence of the chief black eunuch emerges prominently in administrative correspondence as a central intermediary figure. Palace memoranda indicate that the eunuch household managed communication between the harem and the outer court, supervised security, and controlled access to the Sultan. Historical records indicate that this position wielded considerable influence over appointments, information flow, and the daily management of the concubine hierarchy. However, bureaucratic documents also suggest that female authority within the harem remained substantial, particularly through the office of the Valide Sultan, whose financial directives appear frequently in treasury instructions. Registers documenting promotion pathways reveal that advancement depended on a combination of discipline, perceived loyalty, and the Sultan's attention. The rank of Gozda, indicating favored status, appears in payment lists as an intermediate category preceding the more politically consequential designation of Hasiki. Surviving correspondence suggests that elevation to Hasiki status brought increased material privileges and, more importantly, potential influence over patronage networks extending beyond the palace walls. Yet the same records also reveal the instability of such positions, as payment reductions and reassignment entries reflect shifting favor and internal competition. Birth registers associated with the imperial household provide insight into the political significance of motherhood within the harem. Contemporary accounts describe how concubines who bore sons entered a distinct status category tied to dynastic continuity. Legal protocols of the period reveal that these women could not be sold or transferred after childbirth, reinforcing their embeddedness within the ruling household. Palace records also indicate that mothers of princes received expanded living quarters, dedicated attendants, and increased stipends, reflecting their proximity to succession politics. At the same time, mortality registers and medical expense accounts offer a more sobering perspective on daily life. These documents record expenditures for physicians, midwives, and medicines, suggesting ongoing health concerns within the densely populated palace environment. Chroniclers noted outbreaks of illness that affected both concubines and attendants, while burial expense entries in treasury logs confirm that death within the harem was a documented administrative reality rather than an exceptional occurrence. The spatial organization of the harem itself appears frequently in architectural maintenance records. Repair logs and provisioning accounts indicate continuous investment in heating systems, bath complexes, and security infrastructure. These documents suggest that daily life was structured around regimented schedules involving communal bathing, prayer routines, training sessions, and supervised leisure. The repetitive nature of provisioning entries for textiles, soap, incense, and food supplies reflects the scale of the institution and the logistical demands required to sustain it. Petitions submitted by concubines or former palace women provide rare glimpses into personal agency within the confines of imperial structures. Surviving legal appeals suggest that women occasionally sought intervention regarding stipends, property disputes, or reassignment after leaving palace service. Court records indicate that such petitions were processed through established legal channels, illustrating that concubines could engage with Ottoman judicial mechanisms, particularly after manumission or marriage arrangements facilitated by the palace. Marriage registers reveal that many concubines eventually left the harem through arranged unions with state officials, military officers, or palace administrators. Financial documents describing dowry allocations indicate that the palace actively organized these transitions, providing clothing, jewelry, and monetary support. Historical records suggest that these marriages functioned as instruments of political integration, distributing palace-trained women into elite households across the empire and reinforcing loyalty networks connected to the court. The political dimensions of the harem become particularly visible in correspondence during periods of succession uncertainty. Chroniclers noted that alliances formed among senior women, eunuchs, and court factions influenced access to princes and the management of information reaching the sultan. Treasury records reflecting sudden changes in stipends, relocations within palace quarters, or expanded security measures suggest moments of internal tension tied to broader imperial instability. While the documentation remains cautious and indirect, administrative patterns imply that the harem operated as a site where dynastic strategy intersected with domestic governance. Travel accounts written by foreign observers occasionally complement palace documentation, though their reliability varies. Some descriptions align with administrative records emphasizing hierarchy, discipline, and training, while others reflect external fascination shaped by limited access and cultural interpretation. Comparative analysis indicates that palace records provide a more restrained and materially grounded depiction, emphasizing routine, hierarchy, and institutional continuity over spectacle. Manumission records represent another significant category of documentation. Legal certificates preserved in Ottoman archives indicate that concubines could receive formal emancipation, often accompanied by marriage arrangements or pension allocations. These documents suggest that while entry into the harem involved coercive systems of enslavement, long-term trajectories sometimes included negotiated transitions into recognized social positions within Ottoman urban life. The complexity of these transitions reflects broader Ottoman legal norms surrounding slavery, household incorporation, and gradual pathways toward freedom. Taken collectively, the administrative documentation of the imperial harem reveals an environment shaped by regulation, hierarchy, and political calculation rather than the simplified narratives often associated with it. Palace records consistently portray concubines as participants in a structured domestic institution whose functions intersected with dynastic continuity, elite patronage networks, and imperial household management. Daily life, as reconstructed through these sources, appears defined by routine training, supervision, incremental advancement, and the constant negotiation of proximity to power. The surviving documentation does not eliminate the realities of coercion inherent in the system, yet it also demonstrates that the lives of imperial concubines cannot be reduced to passive confinement. Financial registers, legal petitions, architectural maintenance records, and succession-related correspondence collectively suggest a complex institutional world in which discipline, opportunity, vulnerability, and political significance existed simultaneously within the boundaries of palace life. Await your instruction to continue. Beyond the administrative structure of stipends and rank progression, palace provisioning registers provide a detailed picture of the rhythms that shaped everyday existence within the imperial harem. Food allocation lists, recorded alongside other palace consumption accounts, indicate standardized dietary patterns that varied slightly according to rank and health status. Surviving kitchen records suggest that concubines received meals prepared within the broader palace culinary system, with ingredients ranging from grains and legumes to meat, fruit, and sweets distributed according to carefully managed quotas. The repetition of these entries across decades reveals a routine built around predictability and nutritional sufficiency rather than extravagance. Textile inventories preserved in treasury archives offer further insight into material conditions. Clothing registers detail seasonal distributions of garments, undergarments, footwear, and ceremonial attire, often categorized by color and fabric quality. These documents indicate that attire functioned not only as a practical necessity, but also as a visible marker of hierarchy. Higher-ranking women received silk textiles and decorative accessories in greater quantity, while trainees and lower-ranking attendants were allocated simpler materials. The frequency of these allocations suggests that clothing maintenance and preparation formed a regular component of daily labor within the harem, involving both personal presentation and collective production through embroidery workshops. Instructional routines appear consistently in training records associated with the Kalfa and USTA supervisory ranks. Surviving documents suggest that concubines spent extended periods engaged in skill development, with evaluation processes determining eligibility for promotion. Music instruction, recitation of religious texts, etiquette practice, and needlework appear frequently in these records, indicating a curriculum intended to produce women capable of navigating elite court environments. Chroniclers noted that discipline was maintained through structured supervision rather than overt physical punishment, though disciplinary reassignment entries imply that behavioral infractions could result in stalled advancement or relocation within the palace hierarchy. Medical expense logs and physician appointment records contribute additional detail regarding physical and emotional conditions. Treasury expenditures referencing herbal remedies, midwifery services, and consultations with palace physicians indicate ongoing attention to reproductive health and general illness. These records suggest that the harem functioned as a medically monitored environment, where pregnancy, childbirth, and recovery were documented with administrative precision. At the same time, mortality and convalescence entries reveal that the palace's protective framework did not eliminate vulnerability to disease, particularly in periods of epidemic activity affecting the broader urban population of Istanbul. Bathhouse maintenance records highlight the centrality of hygiene and communal bathing in daily life. Architectural repair documents reference heating systems, marble surfaces, and water channels within the harem's hammam complexes, indicating sustained investment in infrastructure. Contemporary accounts describe bathing not only as a hygienic necessity, but also as a regulated social space, where hierarchy remained visible through scheduling and supervision. These spaces, while communal, were embedded within the same structures of observation and discipline that characterized other aspects of palace life. The administrative presence of eunuchs emerges repeatedly in correspondence related to movement and security. Entry logs, surveillance directives, and disciplinary memoranda indicate that eunuchs functioned as guardians of spatial boundaries while also acting as intermediaries between the harem and the outer palace. Surviving documents suggest that their authority was operational rather than purely coercive, encompassing logistical coordination, message transmission, and ceremonial organization. However, petitions referencing disputes with eunuch officials demonstrate that tensions could arise over access, communication, or perceived favoritism, reflecting the layered power dynamics within the institution. Financial autonomy, while constrained, appears in account books documenting personal savings and discretionary spending. Some concubines accumulated jewelry, textiles, or coin reserves recorded as personal property within palace inventories. Surviving estate records suggest that such possessions could later be transferred upon manumission, marriage, or death. The presence of notarized inventories indicates that individual wealth, though regulated, was acknowledged within the legal framework governing palace households. This material accumulation sometimes facilitated post-palace stability, particularly for women who transitioned into marriage with officials or entered urban patronage networks. Religious observance also formed a documented component of daily life. Mosque maintenance contributions, Quran manuscript allocations, and endowment participation recorded in palace documents suggest that spiritual practice was integrated into the institutional routine. Chroniclers noted the organization of collective prayers and the involvement of senior women in charitable distributions during religious festivals. These activities appear in financial records as expenditures for almsgiving, clothing donations, and food distribution to urban populations, indicating that concubines participated indirectly in the palace's public expressions of piety. The role of correspondence within the harem provides further insight into informational boundaries. Surviving communication logs indicate that written exchanges between concubines and external relatives were highly regulated, often mediated through eunuchs or authorized scribes. Restrictions did not eliminate communication entirely, but structured it within bureaucratic oversight designed to maintain security and control narratives surrounding palace life. Petitions preserved in judicial archives demonstrate that some former concubines maintained correspondence networks after departure, suggesting that relationships formed within the palace extended into broader social landscapes. Periods of political transition amplified the visibility of the harem within imperial governance. Succession-related memoranda reveal adjustments to security arrangements, increased surveillance, and alterations in movement restrictions during moments of dynastic uncertainty. Treasury documents reflecting sudden expenditure, increases for guards, transportation, and internal provisioning suggest that the harem's stability was closely tied to broader political developments. Chroniclers noted that senior women, particularly mothers of princes, became focal points of attention as competing factions sought influence through proximity to potential successors. The practice of relocating princes to provincial governorships prior to the 17th century introduced another dimension to concubine life. Registers indicate that mothers accompanied their sons to provincial centers, effectively transforming them into political actors within local administrative environments. Correspondence from these provincial households suggests that concubines adapted to roles involving patronage distribution, mediation between local elites and the prince's administration, and supervision of household economies. This mobility contrasts with later periods when changes in succession practice reduced such provincial movement, reinforcing the centralization of the harem within the palace. Educational outcomes for concubines appear indirectly in marriage and patronage records following their departure from palace service. Dowry documents frequently reference literacy, musical training, and etiquette proficiency as valued attributes enhancing marriage prospects within elite circles. Surviving VACFI records established by former concubines indicate administrative competence in managing charitable endowments, suggesting that palace training translated into practical skills applicable beyond the harem. These post-palace trajectories complicate assumptions that harem life resulted solely in isolation or dependency. At the same time, the hierarchical structure produced clear limitations. Registers documenting stalled promotions, reassignment to lower status duties, or delayed marriage arrangements suggest that not all concubines experienced upward mobility. Administrative silence surrounding certain individuals implies that many remained within routine service roles without attaining proximity to political influence. The absence of detailed narrative accounts for these women highlights the selective nature of historical visibility, where documentation tends to preserve records of advancement while obscuring more ordinary trajectories. Architectural modifications recorded across successive reigns further illuminate changing priorities within the harem. Renovation accounts referencing expanded apartments, new courtyards, and reinforced security features suggest that the physical environment evolved alongside shifts in imperial politics and population size. These changes indicate ongoing negotiation between comfort, surveillance, and ceremonial function, reflecting the palace's dual role as both domestic residence and political institution. Foreign diplomatic correspondence occasionally alludes to the perceived influence of certain concubines, particularly those associated with powerful Valide sultans. However, palace financial records often present a more restrained picture, emphasizing administrative responsibilities, charitable patronage, and household management rather than overt political intervention. Comparative analysis suggests that external observers may have interpreted indirect influence through cultural frameworks that differed from the bureaucratic language of Ottoman documentation. Taken together, these records portray daily life within the imperial harem as structured by routine, oversight, and incremental opportunity. Concubines navigated an environment defined by regulated movement, educational expectations, hierarchical supervision, and the constant possibility of advancement or reassignment. The documentation reveals both the constraints imposed by the institution and the varied pathways through which women engaged with systems of power, economy, and social mobility. The administrative character of these sources, while limited in emotional expression, provides a grounded perspective that emphasizes continuity, negotiation, and adaptation within one of the Ottoman Empire's most closely observed domestic spaces. Await your instruction to continue. As the Ottoman Empire moved into the 17th and 18th centuries, palace records reflect gradual, yet significant shifts in the structure and political weight of the imperial harem. Treasury registers, imperial decrees, and administrative memoranda suggest that changes in succession practices reshaped both the physical environment and the lived experiences of concubines. The earlier system, in which princes governed provincial territories accompanied by their mothers, gave way to increased confinement of potential heirs within the palace. Surviving documents indicate that this transition intensified the concentration of dynastic politics inside the harem, reinforcing its role as a central arena of imperial continuity. Household population registers from this period reveal fluctuations in the number of concubines, attendants, and supervisory staff. These demographic records suggest that the harem expanded during times of political stability and contracted during fiscal strain or administrative reform. Budgetary constraints appear in Treasury correspondence, noting reductions in textile allocations, modifications to stipends, and increased scrutiny of provisioning expenditures. Such adjustments indicate that the harem, despite its symbolic association with imperial authority, remained subject to broader economic pressures affecting the Ottoman state. The authority of the Valide Sultan becomes particularly visible in financial directives and endowment documentation. Surviving Vakfi records associated with prominent Valide sultans reveal extensive charitable networks involving hospitals, mosques, public kitchens, and educational institutions. Administrative correspondence suggests that concubines participated indirectly in these philanthropic activities through labor, coordination, and ceremonial representation. Chroniclers noted that the Valide Sultan's household functioned as a parallel administrative center within the palace, influencing appointments, mediating disputes, and supervising the internal distribution of resources. Legal petitions preserved in the imperial court archives offer valuable insight into disputes and negotiations involving concubines. Some documents describe conflicts over inheritance, property rights following manumission, or disagreements regarding promised marriage arrangements. Judicial responses indicate that former concubines could appeal to Ottoman courts to secure dowries, reclaim personal belongings, or contest contractual obligations. These cases demonstrate that the transition from palace life to urban society involved complex legal processes shaped by both household authority and broader Islamic legal frameworks. Manumission certificates from the 18th century increasingly reference pension arrangements rather than immediate marriage, suggesting alternative pathways for women leaving palace service. Treasury logs documenting regular payments to former concubines imply recognition of long-term service within the imperial household. These pensions appear to have provided a degree of financial security, enabling some women to maintain independent residences or participate in urban economic life without immediate integration into marital households. The existence of such arrangements complicates simplified assumptions about dependence following departure from the palace. The emotional dimensions of concubine life remain difficult to reconstruct, yet indirect evidence appears in health records and disciplinary memoranda. Medical consultations referencing anxiety, sleep disturbances, or prolonged illness suggest that psychological strain may have accompanied the highly regulated environment. While administrative language rarely elaborates on subjective experiences, the frequency of physician visits and temporary reassignments indicates institutional recognition of distress. These records, though limited, contribute to a broader understanding of the pressures associated with hierarchical competition and restricted autonomy. Education continued to play a central role, as reflected in instructional expenditure logs and manuscript inventories. Surviving documents suggest that literacy rates among palace women may have exceeded those of many urban populations, particularly among higher-ranking concubines. Libraries maintained within the harem included religious texts, poetry collections, and instructional manuscripts, indicating intellectual engagement alongside domestic responsibilities. Chroniclers noted the presence of musical performances and literary recitations during ceremonial gatherings, reflecting the cultivation of cultural refinement as a component of palace identity. The 19th century introduced additional transformations shaped by administrative reform and changing diplomatic realities. Reform-era decrees addressing palace expenditures led to more detailed accounting procedures, producing records that further illuminate daily operations. Budget reviews conducted during this period reveal attempts to rationalize spending on clothing, maintenance, and personnel salaries, suggesting that the harem was incorporated into broader modernization efforts affecting the imperial court. These reforms did not dismantle the institution, but adjusted its administrative transparency and fiscal management. Foreign diplomatic observers during the reform era produced accounts that sometimes intersect with Ottoman archival material. While these narratives often reflected curiosity about secluded spaces, comparisons with palace records reveal discrepancies between external perception and internal administrative reality. Ottoman documentation consistently emphasizes continuity of routine, hierarchical supervision, and domestic governance, whereas foreign accounts occasionally interpreted indirect influence as overt political intervention.